Well, as you may or may not know, you probably know this, that Father and Deacon Brian and myself, we kind of take turns preaching them, right? Then you see Father, and you see Father, and you see Father, you get a little sick of Father, then Deacon Dave comes. Sorry, Father, I had to throw that in there. So we take turns, and it's pre-planned. And so you can look it up. Obviously, if you're the preacher, you can say, oh, I'm preaching this. Here's the gospel. And I thought, of all the great gospels that have been in the last several weeks, I got to get this one. Love your enemies. Do I look like a guy who loves my enemies? And I say that, of course, kiddingly, but not so much at times. Jesus, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, and be perfect, my dear friends, just as your heavenly Father is perfect. You too, deacon, me. You just heard, my friends, what obviously I've already pointed out, one of the most difficult sayings, I think, of all time of Christ. Love your enemies. Pray for them. The evil ones, that's what it says. Love them. You know, as I was thinking about this, you do too. You can think about it right now. And it points it out in the gospel. I like most of you. There's some of you not so much, but most of you I like. I hesitate to say love is used so much, but I like you. I smile at you, you smile back. Old Dave's smiling at me here, that's great. I mean, you feel that, all of you smiling. Well, what's so great about that, though? Because if I smile at you, you smile back, we're even. And when I go to God, he's going to say, you already paid for that, deacon. You smiled at him, he smiled back. Now you're even. But do I smile at the person I don't like? That's at the heart of all of this, and much deeper than all of that even. Somebody that you really have a beef with. Somebody you, dare I say it, you might hate them at times. You all have somebody like that in your life? Do we? Yeah. Think of it. I could think of a few right now. I need to forgive them. I think I have, but I probably have. Then I go back into hatred sometimes, thinking about the ugly stuff and, oh, they did this to me and blah, blah, blah. And I'm angry about it again. You know, I could say to Christ, I love most people, Lord, but why this? Why did you have to say this? You know, it really goes, to the heart of what we do as people. We not only hate some people sometimes, then we call for revenge or to try to get even. But God says, forgive. I want to take a moment here this morning and talk to you a little bit about a movie, kind of a movie review here this morning. A movie that I went to several months ago in Milwaukee, and it's a movie that was based largely on Christianity with Catholic themes. That's why nobody heard of it, I guess. But it deals with the themes of this gospel, many of them, including Christian spirituality, prayer, and conscience rights, and free will, the struggle between right and wrong, and finally, and what I want to talk about in this movie, forgiveness. Forgiveness. And it's a huge theme in this movie. What movie? The movie is entitled A Hidden Life. That's the name of it. And I see a couple nodding. Somebody's heard of it. It's called A Hidden Life. It's a movie you should see. I don't know where you get it. I mean, I'm not the tech guy. It's around out there somewhere in cyberspace, but it's out there. And it's the story, a true story, of a man called Franz Jägerstätter. Like the way I said that? Jägerstätter. Yeah, he's an Austrian guy. World War II. He was an Austrian farmer, and he refused to join the armies of the Third Reich, and he would not pledge allegiance to Hitler's troops nor to his philosophy. And that decision in the movie, as you see, cost Franz Jägerstätter his life. They arrested him and ultimately put him to death. Now, Franz and his family lived, as I said, in Austria. And in fact, there's a beautiful scene. He has a wife, Franziska, I think her name is, and 3 lovely young girl daughters, young ones. And they live, as his wife said, she says to Franz, "Oh, Franz, Don't worry about the Third Reich. Don't worry about any of that, for we live in the Alps. We live above the clouds. They don't care about us. We're way up there. You know the rest of that story already because I've given it away, right? They did care. And the Germans came there, and they recruited among this town. This town that he lived in was called St. Radegund's. These were Catholic people. And it was a town, it appeared to me, about 4,000 or 5,000 people. Farmers, way up there in the mountains. They farmed. That's what they did. So they're a tight-knit group, probably several relatives, etc. Franz lived there with his wife, 3 daughters, and his mother on farming, and when all this took place. Well, when the Germans came, they recruited these men for the army, for the German army. And Franz did go and sign up. He said, yeah, I'll sign up, but I'm not going to go much beyond that. And he wouldn't take the oath, and it kind of starts that way. Well, many of the town's men did take the oath. God bless them, but that's what they did. And as it turned out, they didn't welcome any dissenters from the norm. And so Franz was a dissenter, the only one, actually, that I saw. And the town turned against him. And they hated him. And they threw things at him. And they called him names. And they excluded him. They would not help him on his farming duties, which they all had done in the past. And so he was just totally out there alone with his wife and family. And they did the same thing to his wife and his kids. Threw rotten tomatoes at him, if you will. Called them names. Bullied them. Well, finally, Franz is called to go. So he goes. He's standing in line. And when the time comes to take the oath, raise your right hand and repeat after me, he stands like this. So the German guy gets in front of him and says, what is your problem there, buddy? And Franz says, I can't do it. So they arrest him. I don't want to go through all of that. They arrest him, put him in jail, and ultimately he is executed. There are so many wonderful scenes in this movie. I urge you to see it. A Hidden Life, the story of Franz Jägerstätter. If you see it anywhere, watch it, because it's a movie for our time. It is a movie that we need to see. This man ultimately gave his life for God. Many said to him, Franz, why are you doing this? Why not just sign your name to the oath, raise your hand, and who cares? Nobody cares. You're nobody. Nobody will ever remember any of this. And Franz says to them and to us and to the world, but I know, and God knows, and I cannot serve evil. Well, anyway, that's not my point. That's not what the point I'm making here. Y'all look, but that isn't it. So he's executed. And I want to get to kind of the end here so I don't go too long. His wife, in the meantime, is back in the St. Radegund's, kind of bearing this exclusion, this bullying. Even Franz's mother is kind of on her case. And she says things to her like, this would have never happened to Francisca, if it wasn't for you. You're religious, and you're kind of a religious nut, and you're this and that and everything else. And so it's rough for the wife. It's pretty rough. But she endures, and she takes it, and she kind of does it with a smile on her face. And I'm finally getting to my point here. So the story, he's executed, and the war ends. And it's kind of become known a little bit of what a wonderful guy he was and so on. But in the meantime, before that, she is now in the village yet with these people, her friends and neighbors and relatives. And there's a scene where she's reconciled with his mother first. His mother comes, her son is dead. She goes in the kitchen and says to Francisca, you know, sweetheart, I've been really mean to you. I'm sorry. And Francisca says to her, I forgive you. I forgive you. That's kind of the point this morning, friends. That's the point. Now, that's pretty deep. I don't know if we have that kind of forgiveness, that issue in our own lives. But I can think of somebody right now where I would probably need to say every day, I forgive you. Kind of like she did. And then further, she's reconciled with the townspeople. And she says to them, these 5,000 or so, I forgive you. I forgive you for treating us this way. I understand, and I forgive you. That's our faith. That's what Christ wants us to do. I just don't do it very well because of pride and my own sins and what I'm afraid to do and afraid to be embarrassed or afraid of this and afraid of that. But this Francisca did do that. She just died, I think 10 years ago, this woman. She was 100 years old, apparently, when she died. And they had a mass for her. And by the way, her husband, Franz, is a blessed of the Catholic faith. He's on his way to sainthood. Maybe some of you know that. And he's going to have a date on the calendar. And hopefully that whenever we hear his name, we'll all know now who this guy was. This is quite a guy and quite a wife and a great model for us today in forgiveness and yet standing for the truth and just being a guy who's a stand-up kind of guy. So at her death, she's buried in the cathedral in Linz, Austria. And there's a big crowd there, among them the townspeople. And when she's brought in, they all stand and applauded just endlessly for half an hour. Because the town and the people knew what a wonderful, wonderful person she was. What a model she was for us. So the next time, I think, for us, when you're faced with something that, some evil, some persecution, somebody in your face, on your case, bad drivers, whatever, we have to forgive ultimately. Let me end by saying this. C.S. Lewis, one of my favorites, one of your favorites, right? The great writer, C.S. Lewis. Here's what he said about forgiveness. To be a Christian, he said, means to forgive the inexcusable, because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you and me. So please, Lord, as I end, grant us the graces to be those people like Franz and his wife who forgive, but yet who stand like jewels among us, of people who we need to emulate and need to be more like. And we ask you that this morning, Lord. Please, God.